It's Off My Bridge, and I am Guy, which means this week we are talking about creating your own monster or creature or alien, animal, creature, monster, alien thing, and that's as requested by Grognard Piper. When you think about monsters within the Star Trek universe, there are several that come to mind. The giant nebula-sized monsters that convince you that you're flying into paradise so that they can slowly digest you. Those are pretty scary kind of creatures. However, Star Trek is always firmly rooted in the idea of science. And as a result, whatever we are creating needs to fit within an ecosystem. There needs to be some way or something that has learned how to survive off of the monsters that we are creating and vice versa. And the reason that I think this is so important is because it makes your creatures feel more authentic, feel more real. And that can only help enhance your story. So how do we do this? Well, in the Star Trek Adventures 2 core rulebook, there is an entire section on how to create NPCs and, by default, monsters. And they talk about the three different categories: the minor, the notable, and the major NPCs. And these three categories are how difficult the creature or NPC is to defeat, but also it gives us a sense of their positioning within the hierarchical structure of whatever space or state they exist in. And so I think it's important to apply that to any kind of monster that you are thinking of creating. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for example, you want to create some kind of alien predator beast thing that can phase through walls. So it can move around the ship with impunity. How it doesn't fall through the ship, I don't know. But anyway, it can move around the ship with impunity. You go, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. I sort of understand that. But how did it and why did it develop this technique in the first place? It must have been on a planet. It must have grown up on the planet. In which case, then, perhaps the planet has got these multi-ridged surfaces. So the planet looks almost like a coral. And the only way for this animal to actually successfully move about is if this animal can move through physical matter, if it's learned how to move through physical matter. Okay, that's fine. So this is our idea, this thing that can move through walls. So why is it a predator? Why is it hunting stuff? It can literally move through walls. So it could theoretically just stick its eyes out of a wall, see its prey, and then strike. And that's pretty damned effective. So we need them to then have prey, and this is the way my brain works. So this is the experiment I'm running. We need them to have prey that have the ability to maybe phase out of existence. So this predator thing is not actually able to walk through walls. It's able to phase into the different phases that its prey have phased into or phased out of in an attempt to escape from it. Okay, that's pretty good. So think of it like a cheetah that instead of running really, really fast, can just shift into a different dimension and then shift back slightly differently in its position, because different dimensions have different values, supposedly. What feeds off of or kills these phased monster predator things? Well, in nature, when we look to what our main predators can suffer from, it's each other, generally speaking. Tigers are isolatory in nature, and when they get together, they fight viciously over territory. So perhaps these phased creatures are very, very territorial as well. Okay. But we do need something that feeds off of these things. Something that's going to cause them to get old and to eventually die, and then to feed on them. So perhaps there's a parasite. Something that attaches itself to the creature that prevents it from phasing. That prevents it from being able to move out of one phase to the other, and so the creature starves to death. Well, now that's interesting. That's very interesting. It locks you to a place. So now we've got three interesting creatures off of our one thought experiment. We've got a parasite that links onto creatures and prevents them from being able to phase. We've got a creature that can phase at will into different dimensions and phase back again, which is primarily a herbivore kind of thing. It doesn't hunt. And then we have the hunter, who can phase through to track these herbivores and things. But perhaps the hunter needs to be able to disable the herbivore in some way. We've got the parasite that prevents phasing, so perhaps the predator pulls the prey into a dimension that kills the prey. Perhaps it's even into the prime material plane. So all of this is actually happening within, let's say, a dimension that has no oxygen, for example. And when the predator pulls the prey into the oxygen environment, guess what happens? That prey suffocates. They can't survive in an oxygen environment, and the predator prevents them from being able to phase out because it's holding on to them, it's latching onto them. So now we have a little ecology going on. We've got interdimensional aliens that don't like to exist in the prime material plane. We've got parasites which will lock you into a different plane. This monster has evolved so much since our original concept. Now all we need to do is start to stat it out. And we go, okay, cool. Well, the little parasite that's going to prevent you from phasing, that to me sounds like a minor monster. It sounds like it's something that is like a leech. You can detect them on you somewhere. You can't move across so that you can scrape them off. And they cause some minor damage. But ultimately, they are just draining energy from you on a constant basis. So they're minor. The herbivorous creatures, I think, could be notable insofar as they travel in large herds. If they move through a dimension that's very close to, say, subspace or to the prime material plane, but not the actual prime material plane, a herd of them might cause some kind of wonderful subspace distortion or spatial distortion that the PCs can't figure out. That means our major NPC is our predator, the one that moves through the different planes, hunting these creatures. And what happens if one of these predators gets stuck because of a parasite in the prime material plane? It's going to try and hunt, but it can't move anywhere. It can't move through walls and things because of this little parasite that's on it. If the parasite's removed, it becomes much more dangerous. Alternatively, what if one of these predators grabs a PC and pulls them into this environment where there are herds of these herbivores running around eating this two-dimensional moss or something along those lines? Well, now that's quite an interesting story in its own right. So mechanically, how do we do this? Well, it's very, very simple. We look at the rules for creating a minor NPC, and so here they are. You create the species trait and the special rule. Well, we know what the special rule is. This creature prevents any kind of interplanar travel. And perhaps we could extend it as well, that it scrambles transporters and target locks and sensor locks and things like that, because it's kind of putting them in a limbo space, sort of in this realm, sort of in that realm type of thing. We need to give it one of the following traits. Is it aggressive, shy? Does it herd? Is it defensive? Again, I think this little thing, it's a defensive creature. It latches onto you, and it's either incredibly small or it's got vicious multiple rows of sharp spines that bury into the skin and make it very difficult to be removed. It's got to have some kind of defensive mechanism. They are passive predators. As you brush past them, they latch onto you, and that's it. Very, very much like a leech. We need to assign some attributes. We need to assign 2 9s, 2 8s, and 2 7s, and then add either a +2 to one of the scores or +1 to 2 of the scores based on the creature description. When you think about these little creatures, they're not going to have a reason of 7. Their reasoning is perhaps 1, maybe 2. They're not there consciously plotting the downfall of empires. They're there to latch on, feed, get pregnant, and have offspring. And that's it. So that's something that we need to bear in mind, is that although the regular sentient NPC has these scores, frequently I'll go, well, maybe with our big predator, they're going to have daring of 9 and control of 9 or 10 or 11, because that makes sense. But they're not going to have insight of 7 or 8 necessarily. They might, but probably not. We then need to assign departments. Once again, when it comes to monsters and things, departments are fairly irrelevant, except for security, which is pretty much the only one that you need to focus on. Command. A predator is not going to have a high command. This little slug thing is going to have 0 command. It's going to have 0 science. It's going to have 0 medicine. It's going to have 0 engineering. These things don't have opposable thumbs. They're not going anywhere. So bear that in mind, that although this is what the rules say we should be doing, common sense should prevail. Security should be the only thing that really creatures are focused on. Unless they've got flight, in which case give them con. Then they've got a flying skill that they can use if they're flying through the air. When it comes to attacks, I generally will use the rule of thumb that minor monsters can do 2 damage per attack. Notable monsters can do 4 damage per attack, and major monsters can do 6 damage per attack. Now, you can play around with these values depending on what kind of monster you're making. If it's a T-Rex, for example, it should be able to do 8 or 9 damage in a single bite, because we know they can swallow humans whole. That's grievous bodily harm. That is deadly type of attack stuff. The little leech who's draining 2 stress points every time they are sucking on you, maybe it should just be 1. It's up to you. There's no guideline here exactly on what you should be doing. But again, it's about finding the balance. Now, why do I say those values for the minor, the notable, and the major? Well, quite simply, these are meant to be easy to overcome, difficult, and then very difficult to overcome. And the damage should be reflected in that. Now, these are all single-handed weapons or two-handed weapons. Take your pick. It doesn't really matter. They can't be disarmed. They can be disabled, of course, but that's a different story. You can now add in an additional special rule if you like, and the core rulebook has got some super cool special rules that you can apply to these NPCs and to these monsters. Go check it out. It's full of inspiration. But again, I remind you, look at the ecosystem. Look at how these creatures would evolve and then draw them out of that environment to make them into a monster, to make them terrifying, to make them really, really, really scary. It's just by taking it out of context. I think our interphasing creature is pretty damn terrifying as it stands. Now, notable and major NPCs, all that they are getting are values. Again, not a huge player when it comes to creating an animal. Its values are eat, sleep, survive, reproduce, and that's it. When it comes to focuses or to traits, if you want to add any of those in, you're welcome to. Again, it's very, very survival-oriented. Hunting, tracking, scent, sight, those kinds of things. That's where you can throw in those bonus numbers. Otherwise, it's just the same thing, but with bigger numbers. And again, I urge you to temper those numbers as you will. That's it from me for this week. Next week, we learn how to think like a Romulan. And there's a bit more to them than you might think. Or perhaps there isn't. You can never be sure with Romulans. Anyway, we'll find that out next week. Until then, I encourage you to hit that like button or the bell button so you can get alerted when new videos drop. And of course, a huge, huge thank you to all of my patrons, wonderful, wonderful patrons. I appreciate you all. And to you for watching the video all the way until the very end. Until next week, I wish you long life and happy gaming.